All right. Welcome, everybody, to today's Friday Fix. These are sessions that we run monthly on the last Friday of every month. The intention of these sessions is a quick seminar for all of our energy advisor members that talks about something specific to your work as an energy advisor, whether that be software that can help you, processes that can help you. Today, specifically, we will be talking about the auditing process and how to successfully survive an audit. We understand that the word audit is, a scary word sometimes. And so that is what today's conversation is all going to be about. We have another session coming up, which I will link to later in today's presentation about making sure you're insured properly for your work on site. And we're always looking for more ideas and suggestions for Friday fixes, so please feel free to reach out to us at any time on a subject that you would like to learn a little bit more about. So to get started today, I've got some quick polls that I'm going to run, and then I will introduce our speakers and we'll get going on this. Also, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. As we're going through our presentation, I will be facilitating questions and I'll be able to jump in with our speakers during that process to get some clarification for you when needed. So with that said, I'm going to run our first poll here. And basically, we want to get an idea of where you're joining us from. Are you joining us from Vancouver Island, Lower Mainland, Fraser Valley, Okanagan, Interior, Northern BC, Sea to Sky? I know that different regions require different things of us energy or of you energy advisors, so it's always interesting to see who's in the room with us. All right. So there's a bit of a share here. About 50% from the Lower Mainland. We've got some Okanagan folks, interior, somewhere tropical. Nobody's on vacation, so that's good. I'm glad to see that. And just our second question here. What level of performance are the majority of your clients building to? Do you work on high performance homes? Whatever gets them occupancy, building code basics, step code basics, step 4, step 5, net zero. What are you getting the lion's share from your clients requesting? And these are not anonymous polls, of course, so you can be honest. All right. About 50% step 4. Whatever gets them occupancy, about 14%, 29% for building code basics. Awesome, thank you. And which programs are you working within the most? Which is a bit of a follow-up question. Code compliance only, code compliance plus EnerGuide labels, EnerGuide for new homes, EnerGuide for existing homes. What takes up most of your day? Awesome. 64% are adding on those EnerGuide labels. All right. And last question. How long have you been a licensed energy advisor? Is this your first year? Have you been doing this for under 2 years? Are you in the wrong room? What is an energy advisor? Did you take the wrong course? 10 plus years. I know we have some vets on this call for sure. All right, here we go. So good mix there. Nobody is brand new, but I know that we all learn something new probably on a weekly or monthly basis. So there's always changes in our industry for sure. All right. So with that, we'll just get into the presentation. If I could get the next slide, please. Sorry, this poll is in front of me. I had to get rid of it. All right. So today's subject is surviving and thriving through an audit. So as most of you know, those of you that are licensed through the Canadian Home Builders as your service organization, we've gone through a pretty extensive internal auditing process. Internal auditing is something that is required by Natural Resources Canada. So it's part of our license agreement as a service organization to do internal audits on a percentage of files for everybody that we are responsible for as energy advisors. This time around, what CHBA decided to do was turn those auditing sessions into more of a coaching opportunity because we did start to see a lot of patterns and a lot of opportunity where we could have some peer-to-peer conversations, some opportunities for the energy advisor to ask questions of the auditor, which is something we don't always get when it's a natural resources audit. So we wanted to make our internal audit more of a conversation and more of an opportunity. Um, and that's the result of today's presentation. So what our speakers have done is they've amalgamated the topics that they saw through their coaching, through their auditing, to come to you with some tips, tricks, best practices, what you can do to make sure that your future audits run smoothly, both internally and with Enercan as well. Because ultimately, we know an auditor, their job is to find something. We want the list of somethings that they find to be as short as possible for you. Next slide, please. So this is just a little quick introduction of our team as a service organization. So of course, my name is Vanessa, and I don't even think I introduced myself properly on this call. I'm the service organization manager for CHB ABC. I've been in that role for about 16 years now. When I say it's dynamic and ever-changing, I absolutely mean that. I learn something new almost every day. I have a partner in crime, Claire Birmingham. She is our internal quality assurance level one. So she's looking at every single file that our energy advisors are putting through our energy programs portal. And she's making sure that you have all the things that we need to successfully submit to Enercan. She'll provide feedback if you don't, and I'm sure some of you that are licensed through us have seen our names quite a bit. We also have Sean Webb, who is our office manager, but she is our backup. So when Claire's away, like she is right now, we've got Sean working in the energy programs office. She's also trained on level one quality assurance, and so she helps us in the background as well. So next slide, please. And this is our energy advisor team that we call upon for our quality assurance specialist activities. So this is our QAS working group. We've got Emma Conway, who's on the call today. We've got Amir. We've got Tessa Hall, who's also our presenter today. And we've got Mark Bernhardt, who is a guest today, but I'm sure we'll have something to say at some point, and you're certainly welcome to join us. There's a little wave from Mark. Hey, Mark. So this is our team that we rely on for our internal auditing. And these individuals have done the additional exams with Enercan to be able to hold this additional license. All of our quality assurance specialists are third parties. And this is who are our coaches throughout this internal process as well. So next slide, please. And this is just an overview, mostly of what I said in my introduction of what our purpose was this time around, to have more of a conversation and opportunity to discuss. And what is it like on site? How can I successfully meet the requirements of the Interguide rating system, as well as meet the requirements of auditing, but also streamline my process as an energy advisor and get through this as quickly and efficiently as possible. So with that, I am going to turn it over to our two speakers today, Tessa Hall and Emma Conway. They have done a significant amount of work putting together this presentation for you. There's some great tips and tricks in here. I will be in the background to review chat, review any questions that you have. And yes, we will be sending a copy of this presentation, this video to you once it is done. Everybody who's registered for today's session will get a copy of the video so you can refer to it later on as a resource for you. And with that, I will mute myself. I'll be in the background here to support, and I'll hand it over to you, Emma.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Vanessa, for that introduction. So today, Tessa and I are going to be walking you through what it's like from our perspective as a QAS or as a coach. So, we've done a number of these reviews over the year for many of the energy advisors on the call here and others. And really, what we want to explore in today's presentation is, what we're looking for when we are completing these reviews. We want to help you try to identify and avoid common pitfalls. We're identifying practical tips and tricks to streamline your process. And, we see a lot of trends, audit to audit, of things that, maybe are being overlooked or could be more clear. So really what we're looking for from you guys is the ability to tell your story. How did you collect all the information? Having good supporting documentation, making sure that your information isn't conflicting or, correct in one place but incorrect in another. And really, ultimately, throughout the presentation, we're going to be supporting and highlighting EnerGuide best practices and procedures. So really, mostly this presentation is just tips and tricks of common pitfalls to avoid.
Great. So if we were to kind of take it to Emma and my perspective or any of the QAS team's perspective, the first thing we're going to do is get a notification that we have a file that needs QAS review. And so we're going to start to download the files that have been submitted and start to look at them. So we thought we'd start by talking about what the minimum submission requirements are from EnerGuide and what we expect those to have included in them. So obviously we need our P and our N files from HOT 2000. We need a copy of your building plans that have been marked up and labeled. We need a data collection form. NRCan provides one in their technical procedures document. It doesn't have to be that one, but we do need a robust DCF. We need our mandatory photos and any other supplementary photos, which we're going to talk about in more detail later. And then we need notes and any supplemental information that you may need to provide in order to justify any changes or any supporting documents that might be necessary for extra modeling things, anything that you noted while you were on site that was different than what was on the building plans, things like that. And then specific to each file, sometimes you'll have other documents that are necessary. In new construction, we're not going to see things like the blower door test waiver, but an owner builder authorization form is absolutely something that we would expect to see if that was the type of file that was being submitted. So that is the beginning of where we start when we are starting to look at a file for an audit.
And I would say the best practice here is if you have any supporting documentation like window shop drawings or, an AHRI certificate or something that you have used to justify why you have modeled something the way that you have, please submit that as supporting documentation. Like everything we need to fully verify your file should be uploaded to the portal when you submit. There's not really an opportunity for us to come back and say, hey, you're missing, one or two items. Please just try to have everything clear and uploaded at the time of submission.
There is a
Great.
question here that I want to jump in with while we're talking about DCF. There is a question about how do QAS people think or how do they feel about the VoltaSnap DCF? Is that acceptable to you?
I mean, the VoltaSnap DCF is, as I believe it, doesn't it just populate everything from the file?
And there's a comment here from Mark. Yes, as a QAS, he does feel that the VoltaSnap does have the information needed. So does the one from Heat, but sometimes
Yeah.
both of the options may need extra notes or additions in some cases. So just make sure that that is there for your auditor as well.
I mean, it is pretty slick because basically it's populating everything from the HOT 2000 file, like as it's been modeled, which ultimately, truthfully, is what a data collection form is supposed to be. A data collection form is supposed to be verification of everything that you've put into your file. So therefore directly populating it from the file, like it's going to be as accurate as possible. My only like warning or hesitation there is you just need to make sure that if that's the procedure that you're following, that everything in your HOT 2000 file needs to be verified as built and needs to be correct. And we do
Yeah,
have
I
a
would just
section on data collection forms coming up.
Yeah. So I would just add quickly that the both of those data collection forms have all of the assembly information and mechanical information, but they don't necessarily have a story about how you got to the measurements that you got to. So looking at your geometry calculations, and adding those as either supplementary or adding them into that DCF would be really, really valuable.
I agree with Tessa, and we actually are going to talk about that further coming up. So, one of the items that we wanted to start off with is just proper identification of a MURB, a multi-unit residential building. So, in the recent documentation, there is Energuide standard. It is very clear that a house with a secondary suite is a MURB. In the past, it used to say like fully or partially stacked, or joined by a common space, but I just want to highlight at the bottom of the slide deck here they have also clarified in version 13 side by side configurations also are considered a secondary suite. So if you have a house with a secondary suite, like a rancher, let's say, so it only is one story and it's clearly, one ownership over that entire home, but the suite is adjacent with no interlocking or overlapping, that still would be a MURB. So let's just make sure that we're correctly identifying that. And then the image here is actually kind of an interesting situation that came up. Um, for me at least, it was a duplex, and each one of the duplex actually on the right hand side had an installed suite. Like you can see, they identified there was a living room, the kitchen, dining, there's a bathroom. It clearly is going to be installed secondary suite. So that side of the duplex was a MURB. And then on the left hand side, it was just identified that it was going to be a future rough-in for a secondary suite. So it actually wasn't being installed. It's just being roughed in. So you can see, even though they've shown possibility that it could have a future bedroom or it could have a rough-in for a future kitchen, the unit on the left-hand side was not a MURB. So just paying attention to the wording on the drawing, is it actually being installed or is it being roughed in? And if it's being roughed in and not actually installed, it doesn't need to be modeled as a MURB. And then the other thing that I will just kind of warn is, we have seen over the years, if you do not correctly identify a MURB, you model it as a single family home and submit it, and you don't have the certification to model or test that MURB, that could be an issue. So my recommendation is just to always review the drawings, try to identify if there's a secondary suite, or even try to identify in a townhome situation, a townhome where the top two floors are interlocking. It's no longer is a by side row home. The two units that are now interlocking become a MURB because of that partially overlapped third floor. So just take the time to review the drawings thoroughly when you're doing your quoting to make sure you're correctly identifying if it's a MURB or not. The next item that we sometimes don't always see consistently is a clear set of marked up drawings and clear geometry calculations. So over the years, I've seen like blank plan sets that have been submitted to me, and blank plan sets aren't helpful because there's no information on there about how you calculated your different areas. So please do submit your marked up drawings. You can see on the image here, this is one of my files that basically we have different colors representing different things. That is a best practice that I would recommend getting into so that you have your own process and your own procedure for marking up drawings. And then the other one that is quite common is, unclear or missing geometry calculations. So, if you're adding together your eave length and your total eave length is 54 feet, how did you come to that number? In the Excel version of the Enercan data collection form, or if you've created your own Excel version of your own data collection form, my best practice is to always show your work. Even if you're going 2 plus 2 plus 1 equals 5. I mean, we all know how to do that math in our head, but as an auditor, you should be like, if you're pulling numbers from your marked up drawings and you're using them in your data collection form, do a formula. Get in the habit of always doing a formula, right? Add up your perimeters, add up your areas, so that we can clearly see how you came to those calculations. It'll make our job faster, and it'll also, show your work and show your knowledge that, you are doing things correctly. Sometimes we've received geometry calculations in Excel version that are locked or have been converted to a PDF. And then the downside of that is we can't see the math. So, our preference would be please submit the Excel version of your geometry calculations as part of your data collection form. And don't lock it in a way that we can't see those formulas. Always show your work. If you are completing geometry calculations in a separate file, I mean, at minimum, you could upload it as additional file, but Enercan is really pushing for, one data collection form, one overall data collection form. So my recommendation is if you're using the Enercan data collection form or your own version of a data collection form, start merging it into one master file, copy and pasting the tab from your geometry calculations into the Enercan one so we can see your work. You should have the ability to do that. And speaking of the data collection form, this is probably one of the number one issues that we see is just incomplete or missing critical information. So, quite often we'll see the Hot 2000 file populated correctly with assemblies and mechanical systems, but then when we go back to the data collection form, there's, maybe certain layers that are missing, or maybe, it was when you did the original model, you had R22 BAT in the data collection form, but throughout the process, throughout the build, you did some iterations and they upgraded to R24. So in your Hot 2000 file, you have R24, but in your data collection form, you have R22. That's now conflicting information, which we as QASs are instructed to mark as incorrect. So I totally understand. I totally sympathize. I go through this same issue myself where, the original data collection form very quickly goes out of date because of all of the iterations and as-built verification that you do. Same with mechanical systems. Quite often you go on site, you verify it in your photos, maybe you're inputting it directly into your Hot 2000 file, and you're not, going back and importing it into the data collection form. So there are multiple ways to deal with this. If you are using the Enercan data collection form as part of your final as-built process, you need to go through all the tabs and make sure it's updated as per your Hot 2000 file. That's probably the most time-intensive procedure. My procedure that I follow is I prefer to use my step code reports as verification of all the as-built assemblies. So, I can submit that tab into my Excel file of my data collection form and say, see, step code as-built report for all verified files. That is personally my preference to try to streamline this process, but come up with a process that works for you and think of it as, if it's in my Hot 2000 file, it needs to be in my data collection form. That is what we are always going back to. And, even if, there is different information on the drawings, technically what you put in the data collection form is what you have verified. So that should always be the location with the correct information. And ultimately, if you have, certain, I don't know, calculations that are a bit unique or, variations from the drawings that you want to justify, you can even start to add notes to the data collection form to tell the full story. You know, why did you model the window areas different from on the drawings? Because you went to site and you took site measurements, right? Tell the full story, add those justifications, not only for us when we're doing the QAS review so that we can understand how you came to the final decision that you made, but also for yourself. If a year later you're getting audited and maybe some questions came up, why did you model this as, this supplementary heating system as always, as opposed to never? Maybe you have a helpful note in there to remind yourself why you made that decision. So adding notes is definitely a best practice. Additional supplemental documentation. One of the main issues that I see is a lack of verification of your window modeling. What is the performance metrics, the USI and the solar heat gain coefficient? So quite often I have seen, one fixed window label that is submitted, that is used to model, every glazing opening in the house, including sliding glass patio doors, hinge doors, skylights, etc. It is not common that all of these different types of, well, I don't want to say not common. It's borderline not possible that all of these different glazing openings would have the exact same performance metrics. So get in the habit of verifying when it comes to windows, each operation type, patio doors, hinge doors always have a different value compared to windows and skylights. So just get in the habit of each type of glazing opening that you're verifying either with, if you're doing a custom code in particular, like the code, like the blue code selector where you're putting in the USI, the solar heat gain, the frame height, number of panes of glass, and low E coatings. If you're doing that overall window characteristic modeling approach, I need proof and supporting documentation of why you made those decisions. So at mid-construction, if you are going to mid-construction, take photos of all the different window labels. I mean, the most intensive approach would be to take a photo of each window label, maybe starting at the front door, going in a clockwise manner so that you can back at your desk, compare it to the elevations and know what window label goes with what window. That's definitely the most intensive. The other approach would be to, take photos of each unique window label that you see. So, here is my awning window. I've looked at all my awning windows and they have the same metrics. Here's my fixed window. Oh, I noticed that the really large fixed windows have this label and the smaller ones have this label. My patio doors, my skylights, etc. And if something is unlabeled, like a front door or a skylight or a patio door, I would follow up and get supporting documentation like a shop drawing. In new construction with step code, I would say 99% of the time I am able to get shop drawings with the USI and solar heat gain coefficient of each window. That's another, helpful way to verify the information that you're looking for. So if you are modeling a custom code, which I strongly recommend for any kind of performance modeling, we need supporting documentation and each type needs to be verified, please. And here's a little bit of my tip that I already talked about verification of as-built assemblies. So when I'm filling out my as-built step code report for my municipality, I'm identifying all of the layers. So for the above grade wall, I'm including my cladding, I'm including my rain screen, I'm including, the outside layers and the inside layers. All of the drop downs from my code selector are represented on the as-built report image that you see here. So instead of going and, having to update, previous information in my data collection form that's now out of date, I can just copy and paste that Excel tab from my as-built report into my data collection form and just treat it as this is my master list, this is all the verified information, and this is how I, make the process faster for myself. So, quite often the issue that we're seeing is, outdated information in the data collection form, maybe some information on the drawings is out of date, and, all the information I assume in your Hot 2000 file is probably what you intended to submit, but then you have nowhere to back up that information. So please, please, please do get in the habit of figuring out a process that works for you where you're submitting all the verified as-built assemblies.
Great. So, on the topic of as-built assemblies, custom codes are super, super helpful. Emma's just talked about how to use them well with Windows. They can save us a lot of time as we're doing the modeling. But it is, I wouldn't say common, but it is definitely something that we notice when we're going through audits. Perhaps the code that was selected doesn't actually match the assembly that we see in the photos on site, or there were multiple versions of, say, an exposed floor in the home, and we've used the same code for each one, even though they had different assemblies. So those are items where when we're starting to do the audit, we're looking at your DCF, we're looking at your photos, we're looking at your Hot 2000 file, and we're comparing them all. And if they don't match, we need to mark that as incorrect. And so it is really important that they do all jive. And so some of the things that can be really helpful there, especially from a code editor perspective, we start to build up common codes that we're using. Some can be very specific to a builder though. And so it's really important to make sure that the code that we're using, we've clearly labeled and identified all the layers in it so that we know we're selecting the right one when we're going through and doing that modeling. So super important that we do that. Especially on Windows, if not everything else. But really, it is a great, useful tool. It just needs to be used appropriately. And for those that haven't had the time yet, there was a program bulletin that just came out. I think it was 146 that really talks about custom codes, how the code editor is supposed to be used, where those layers are supposed to go, what's included, what's not. And it has some really good examples. So I would definitely encourage you guys to take some time and actually take a look at it. It's a big slide deck, but it's really valuable information in there for anyone that's ever had any questions about how to use the code editor correctly. So definitely take a look at that. As far as custom codes go, there is another option for some assemblies, and that is, Emma, if you can go to the next slide, that is to use the user specified code. It does not work though in all situations, and it's really important that it is only used where it is allowable by NRCan. So areas where it is allowed, double stud walls. Hot 2000 just can't quite handle how to build those properly. Below grade insulation, exterior foundation wall insulation, those are easy assemblies to do a user specified code. Tested assemblies, those are things like prefab wall panels that are being brought to site but built in a factory. Those absolutely we can use a user specified code for, but we do need to have documentation for them to justify using that user specified code. Anywhere where we're using spray foam and not using the default values from Hot 2000 for it, say it has a higher R value per inch, we do need to have the report from the spray foam facility for that. And then also the composite calculator when you're doing basements, crawl spaces, walls that have multiple different assemblies and we're trying to encapsulate them all into one section. Those absolutely we can use the user specified code for. Those I would recommend though, if you're going to do that, when you're building up each one of those individual codes and calculating that R value, take a screenshot of that and include it in your DCF for each one of those different assemblies so that we can follow your logic and your reasoning behind each one of those different assemblies and how that composite calculator is working. So super, super valuable information for telling your story, which is really what we're trying to get you to do overall here. So yeah, so anything user specified has to have some sort of justification or documentation provided for it. Sometimes it's as simple as a data sheet on, say, sub-slab installation, say you're using graphite, get the data sheet, get the R value specs for it, and just include them either in your DCF or include them as supplemental information. But just make sure that any claim that you're making, especially when it's so hard and fast user specified, needs to have some sort of supporting justification for doing it. So yeah, those are the appropriate areas to be using user specified. And then, hopefully this will go away soon. But just by nature of the fact that we start our P files so early in a project, and some custom homes can take years to build, when we start those files, we may be starting under one procedure under NRCan, and as they evolve and change over time, we need to evolve and update our P&N files to match the appropriate procedures at the time that we're submitting them into the portal. And the Appendix C to Appendix O transition is still live and active, and we're seeing it when we're looking at the audit. So to be clear, Appendix C is no longer valid. So we no longer have any more crazy tall basements with wall pony walls that are out of control and that above grade height of highest ceiling error that happens because your basement walls are too high. We are essentially bringing everything back down to a simplification of you separate out your basement, you separate out your slab on grade, you build your walls, and you attribute each component to each one of those items. But if you had a file that was in Appendix C and you're trying to transition it back, it's usually pretty clear when we're looking at the audit. Something has been missed somewhere, whether it's changing the above and below grade calculations, or one of the heights is off, or we've forgotten to put the floor header on the right component, or forgotten to put the windows back in the pony wall as opposed to being in the basement wall. Those items can really affect the overall performance of the home. And so it's really important to associate them with the right component. And really, this kind of gets back to your DCF, your geometry notes, and your marked up plans. Having a more robust system in place when you're doing the initial evaluation of the file will help you when you have to go back and make these changes on site, because it's much simpler if you know exactly where you broke out that section of pony wall, and you can now take the header that's on that and move it to the area that it's appropriate for now. Whereas if you don't have enough of that data to support you in the background, you almost have to start all over with your basement when you're changing it back to an Appendix O. So what I would say here is just take your time as you're going through this conversion, and really make sure that you've got all your components in the right area so that we don't have to mark them as incorrect. And then finally, on the Appendix O section, the NRCan, there's always been a bit of confusion about any basements and crawl spaces, basement that are attached to each other, and the reduction of the wall area that is connected between the two of them, whether we were supposed to include it or not supposed to include it. NRCan has made this very clear. There are some nice, pretty pictures here that make it very, very obvious that anywhere where the perimeters are attached, the wall area that is in that attached section is not to be calculated in your below grade section. Hot 2000 is doing it in the background on its own. We do not need to add any wall area in that section. So just a little note, but it can significantly change the numbers on your file. So please pay attention to that as you're going through. So I think, yeah.
Another item that comes up quite often is the incorrect identification of a crawl space. So quite often it says crawl space on the drawings, but using Bluebeam, the tool that I used, if you take it to 2 decimal points, which is very critical in this situation, quite often I'm seeing that these crawl spaces are, 4 feet, or even one example here was 3.96 feet, which is greater than 3.94 feet, which is the definition of a crawl space according to the EnerGuide rating procedures. So what I would do in this situation, again, take the measurement to 2 decimal points, even though it says crawl space on the drawings. I would actually model this. I call it a shallow basement. That's my own internal procedure to remind myself that it's, it's not a full height, 8-foot basement. It's a, shallow basement attached usually to a normal basement. So please just do remember this definition that if it's 3.94 or lower, yes, you would model it as a crawl space, but as soon as it's any larger, 3.96, 4 feet or bigger, really, it technically isn't a crawl space in Hot 2000, it is a basement.
Yeah. Okay, so that would be kind of our first overview on all of the assemblies that are in your documentation provided. Then we're going to start to look at your mechanical systems and how they've been modeled. Um, and one of the areas that we see a lot of confusion or um, some muddling in trying to get it to work properly is using the heat pump calculator. Um, so originally, when this was put out, it was put out as a cold climate heat pump calculator. So it was designated to help us tell Hot 2000 how to model a heat pump correctly. Because at the time, the software and still the software doesn't really understand the values if we just directly input them and it doesn't calculate out correctly. So they've created this workaround. Initially, it was for cold climate heat pumps, but as it has evolved and as new products have come out onto the market and new rating systems and more complexity in the way that we're building, the heat pump calculator itself has evolved as well. And so, as of not this version of the documentation, but the last version of Hot 2000, we now have more instances where we are supposed to be using this heat pump calculator. Now, I would preface this by saying that we would be using this only when the heat pumps are matching interior and exterior units. So anytime we have an AHRI number, we would be taking a look to see whether it's appropriate to be using this heat pump calculator. So the reasons why you're going to use this. The automatically, if you have a cold climate heat pump, single heat pump, you're going to be using this. If you have multiple heat pumps, whether they are air source heat pumps or a mixture of cold climate and air source heat pumps, you need to be using the calculator. But additionally, even if you have just an air source heat pump, but it's rated in the HSPF2 and the SEER2 metrics, we also need to be using the heat pump calculator. So that's a lot of instances and there's a lot of reasons to be using it. So really, I would recommend definitely getting very comfortable with using it. Understanding the different tabs, understanding all the inputs that need to be involved in using it, and how to transfer all that information over into Hot 2000 so that your Hot 2000 file is actually modeling and calculating the capacities correctly. If this is something that is of wants more depth or more in depth, then absolutely suggest it to Vanessa, and maybe we can do another Friday Fix that is totally dedicated to this. I've spent a lot of time on this heat pump calculator, so I'm sure I could provide some extra support there if necessary. Now, that is if we have a rated matching unit. But if we don't have a matching unit, there is an entirely different procedure that is expected from the ERS procedures, and it isn't commonly modeled correctly. And so we just kind of wanted to go over this one. It's usually about half correct and half missing. So I just kind of wanted to go over kind of the details of what we are supposed to do in that situation. So first and foremost, if your interior air handler or furnace coil does not match your exterior unit, then you cannot use the energy label that's on the exterior unit as a proxy for your capacity, your HSPF, and your SEER. You must model it at its unknown values. If they don't match on the inside, they are not a rated combination as far as Enercan is concerned. They've done a couple of information sessions on this. There's supplementary information we can talk about. I'm sure Vanessa has the town hall meeting on that. But what to do when that actually does happen? So from the HSPF and the SEER rating, those are really simple. You're just going to click the radio button that says air source heat pump and leave it at the default values. So 5.9 for HSPF and 10 for SEER. But the output capacity can change. So I strongly recommend that prior to modeling this heat pump, you have done everything else in your file. Okay, so you've updated all your assemblies, you've made sure that all your windows are correct, all your other mechanicals, you've done your tightness test inputs, everything is in there. Okay, You're going to click on the air source heat pump button. You're going to leave the defaults in the HSPF and the SEER. You're going to set the capacity to 1.25 times the cooling load and run a calculate. Okay, that is going to bounce you back out to the main menu, go back into the heating and cooling section, and take a look at what the output capacity has been calculated for the file. If it is under 7 kilowatts or 24,000 BTUs, you're going to leave it just as it is. If it has come over that number, then you're going to select user specified and change it to that 7 kilowatts or 24,000 BTUs and leave it there. That is the max amount that Enercan wants in there when you have an unmatched unit. So that is where we stop. All right. Any questions about that one? Because it does come up fairly often, I'm understanding. Okay. Let's go
Great.
on.
And kind of building on that, another thing that we see come up quite often is if you are not pulling the actual model numbers correctly from site, or maybe you're missing some photos from on site. It's kind of a similar situation. You know, if you cannot verify the specific model and then the specific performance data on the Enercan searchable product list, we are forced to use the default values. So, you know, if you maybe you have your outdoor coil, but you couldn't get your indoor coils because they were, you know, buried behind drywall and you weren't able to actually verify the model number from the builder, you know, we're back to using default values. Sometimes I even have seen situations where, you know, you think you're pulling the furnace model number, but really on the left here, you pulled the evaporator coil of the heat pump. You didn't collect the furnace model number. You know, I understand that here in BC, it's a safe assumption to assume that it's 95% minimum AFUE because that's what the manufacturing laws are here in BC. However, you know, EnerGuide standard doesn't allow that. You have to use the default values, which I believe would be what, Tessa, 92 AFUE?
Yeah, I believe so.
So again, just take your time on site, get the verification photo if you can. Make sure, you know, if you're doing a heat pump with a furnace, you know you have at least three model numbers, your outdoor coil, your indoor evaporator coil, and your furnace. So just making sure you're not rushing in. Honestly, if you do miss a key photo, my recommendation is like follow up with the builder, if you do get a spec from them, you know, sometimes specs include multiple model numbers, like they need to confirm in writing the exact model number that has been used. And I would personally, as a QAS, accept the supporting documentation. But again, you have to tell the story. You have to include that in the data collection form. You know, somewhere, some justification, you know, photo not possible on site, or even just honesty, photo missed on site. You know, here is the model number that was provided by the builder. I personally would accept that as a QAS, but if you have no story, no justification, I have to mark it as incorrect. Another item that we see coming up quite often, especially for heat pumps, is misidentification of the HSPF for region 5 versus region 4. So quite often you'll pull like the energy guide label, and actually let me add my little laser pointer here. You know, you can actually there's some hints here, right? US government energy guide label. So for this specific outdoor coil, you know, the SEER 2 is this and the HSPF 2 is this. So you're thinking to yourself, great, I have all the verification that I need. But what you're not realizing is that, you know, in America, it's region 4 for HSPF. In Canada, we're region 5. So this HSPF 2 is not actually correct, right? If you looked it up on the searchable product list and you matched your outdoor coil with your indoor coil, you've got the correct AHRI number. You can see the SEER was correct, the 15.2, but the HSPF for region 5 for Canada is actually significantly lower. So, you know, to be clear, this information is not correct. And actually, the other thing that I want to also point out, when you click on this on the searchable product list, it's kind of funny. It says SEER 2, but then it says just HSPF. So I think that's a typo in my opinion on the searchable product list. Like this, I know this doesn't say HSPF 2. It should. And again, my opinion is that's a bit of a typo and is a little bit confusing on the searchable product list currently. But I mean, here's literally your proof, right? HSPF 2 in America is 7.8. HSPF 2 in Canada is 6. And this is actually the minimum efficiency allowed for HSPF 2 in Canada. So again, just making sure that you're like, see how this was actually, yeah, sorry, this is a screenshot though. So this was actually not modeled correctly with this needs the HSPF 2 and the SEER 2. And additionally, to Tessa's point, since this heat pump is rated with HSPF 2 and SEER 2, you should, in addition to all of this, be using the heat pump calculator. So again, I think there is a lot of confusion right now regarding, region 5 versus region 4. We've converted to the SEER 2 and the HSPF 2, so we just need to be aware of that so that we're following the correct procedures.
Yeah, great. Um, so in general, we've looked at the heating equipment. From a ventilation standpoint, I think we generally agreed that if there was an HRV in the house, almost all the files we looked at were well modeled or had, minor things, but nothing that seemed like confusion. However, when we were looking at a setup where there was a continuous exhaust fan or utility fan being used in conjunction with either a forced air furnace fresh air vent or passive supply air, it was definitely there were a lot of different options out there in what was supplied. And very little of it was actually the way that the EnerGuide procedures state that we need to collect the documentation. So just as kind of a reiteration of what we are expected to do there. First thing, you're on site, you're going to find the fan that is the continuous model, the one that is running at low speed. You're going to take off that horrible plastic cover that is the bane of my existence to get back on. And you're going to look for the model number on it. It's going to have the make and the model number on it. And sometimes, not all, actually, maybe less than half, will also have an option to set them at different fan speeds. If that's the case, take that information on site because that item could be set at a different flow rate than what you would have expected from your initial model. Take that information. You're going to take that back to the office and look up that specific model and make in the HVI database. If the information is there, you can use that to collect the fan power that is actually being used by that fan in the configuration that it's in. And then all of that information should be in your whole home heating tab or ventilation tab with a utility fan, with your make, your model number, the flow rate that's known, and if possible, the fan power that we've collected from the HVI database. So really important that all of those items get selected and put into Hot 2000 to calculate that properly.
And to be clear, like this is also kind of where I see the confusion sometimes is between like bath fans as supplemental versus bath fans as the whole home ventilation system. If a bath fan is truly supplemental, there's an HRV system in place, then you don't have to verify any photos or take any photos of the make or model number of those supplemental systems. As soon as the bath fan becomes the whole home ventilation system, this triggers this requirement for site photos of the make and model number and verification of the actual flow rate, whether that's, the low speed of that make and model, or if there is this CFM controller that I think you see quite often on the Panasonic unit. Please do go and take those extra steps when it is the whole home ventilation system.
Yes. Okay, so another thing we tend to look at as we're looking through your photos is to make sure that the house was actually ready for your assessment. So sometimes you get to site and for all the preparation that you've done, all the communication that you've done with your builder, you get there and things are not actually ready for you to be there to test. So I'm just going to point out from the technical procedures and the standards, there are eligible state of home requirements. And the most important ones are A, that all your mechanical systems, and that includes ventilation, are on site and installed at the time of your evaluation. That all your windows, doors, skylights, any fenestration in the envelope is installed and intact, up to one of those items, one single one of those items, not one of each, that can be missing or broken, and we can temporarily seal that. So those are really common areas where I see photos where I'm like, ooh, how, for example, if there was an range hood that wasn't installed, and you went ahead and did a test, well, did you leave that hole open or did you close it? That's not part of the testing procedures. We need to kind of have a better conversation about those things. So don't be afraid to say no if the home is not ready for you. It is really important that you are assessing the home and pushing back sometimes on that builder to say, hey, you're not actually ready for me. Maybe call me in a week or two when you've got this list of little things done. Another one that's important, and if I saw this photo on the right as a front of house photo, I'm going to start digging deeper into your file. This is personally one of my own, so I know what was happening here. But the building envelope needs to be complete. And so it is really important to kind of assess the building and make sure that all the little details that are supposed to be there are complete. And so, for example, this one, if I had showed up and it was an exterior air barrier on this home, I might be looking a little bit closer to make sure that that exterior air barrier is completely supported, that it's going to handle an air tightness test, that everything on the interior is not going to cause any sort of damage. Whereas if this was an interior air barrier, yeah, it doesn't look great, but the home is likely still eligible and still has no problems. But it is, if you get a photo like this as the front of house, it's kind of a red flag. So you're going to start to have us dig through photos more. So definitely something from your procedures when you get to site, just make sure that your home that you're evaluating is in an eligible state to be evaluated at the time. And that brings us into blower door testing. So this has had some, I don't want to say loosening, but changing of the requirements under EnerGuide over the last iteration of the technical documents. And so I just kind of like to bring this to everyone's attention as I'm talking through these points with them. The N value still needs to be between 0.5 and 1. The correlation coefficient still needs to be 0.99 or higher. But that 7% error reading is no longer an automatic fail. Our upper and lower target pressures have been adjusted so that we can now start the test anywhere between -60 and -45 and finish anywhere between -10 and 20. They don't have to be at 5 PA increments in between for our target pressures. We can't have any one pressure reading exceed a 10 PA difference, so that's super important. We can do no fewer than 6 pressure readings, but ultimately I would say if you're already doing an 8-point test, just continue on because you're probably just good at it the way it is anyways. The fan pressure, this is one I see actually quite a bit when I'm looking through. Make sure that you understand your fan's CFM readings and what's appropriate for each flow rate on your ring. If it falls below the CFM rating that for that flow rate, that test point is invalid, and we can no longer delete test points when we're doing a test. So really keep an eye on that as you're going through your tests, especially if you're doing manual entry. And if you start to fall below that, change your flow rates, change your configuration on your fan. Best practice, take a new photo of your fan in its new setting and continue on your test as you were. And And then finally, this has become more of a hard and fast rule than a recommendation. If your initial and final static pressures are higher than 3 PA difference between the two, then you need to actually stop the test and restart again. Just go from the beginning. This can happen when we have really yucky, windy days, or there's been a lot of fluctuation inside and outside. If you've got people moving around inside the house, I've even had shop vacs change the pressure differential inside the house to outside and had to restart a test. So it happens. It's really important that you're either watching your proprietary software or watching your inputs if you're doing your test manually into Hot 2000 on site and making sure that your test was valid before you leave so you don't waste time and have to come back and do it again. So on to the next slide. As for doing it again, there is some information that we have had provided to us by NRCan as far as what is acceptable and some training and clarification around different types of tests, especially long host tests for multiple zones. Really, really helpful information in their YouTube playlist. The playlist is long, but each section kind of goes over a different item, and so they can kind of stand alone. Really important, if you have any questions, find them in Appendix P of the technical procedures, bookmark the YouTube playlist, refer to it when you need to. It's really, really helpful, especially when we're looking at talking about long zone or long host testing, identifying blower door test zones. I would say that most, not all, but most houses with secondary suites are likely going to have a secondary zone. But even single family homes can have oddities where they'll have an entire little section that needs to be tested on its own and do a 2-zone test too. Some people are doing long host testing with a single fan. Some are doing multiple blower doors at the same time. Either is accepted as long as you're understanding the procedures around doing that. And sometimes the technical procedures documentation is a little bit vague, or it's designed for a manometer that you don't have, or there's all sorts of situations where you can get into where you have questions. And I would definitely recommend taking a look at this YouTube playlist because it actually does answer a lot of those questions really well. I think we can go to the next one. Yes. All right. So photo requirements. Just as an overview, I'm going to just kind of go through what photos absolutely need to be submitted for every file. A reminder that those photos need to be taken by the energy advisor that's taking responsibility for the file that is on site, that the metadata needs to be intact, and that the date and time have to be searchable in the photo's properties, that they have to be taken on the same day as the assessment that you're doing, and that we want them to be nice and clear and resolute so we can see all of the information that's on them. Okay, so to dig in to the next one here. Yes, awesome. So exterior elevations, all 4 or 6 or whatever, however your geometry works out, we need an exterior elevation shot of every side of the home. Okay, that includes all fenestration, everything that we need to capture within the model. Basement walls, frost walls, pony walls, above and below grade sections, where it transitions, those are all really important pieces of information that are really best told with a photo. So take as many as you can and supply them to us. And I think the next slide. Great, crawl spaces. So from crawl space perspective, what are we looking for? We are looking for the wall composition, insulation levels. We're looking for presence of heat. We are looking for floor header. And then and I don't know how often this happens, but for me, it happens quite often. The floor plans will show the height at 3.94, and then I get to site and they're 3 feet or 3'2". If anything has changed from the floor plans to your site evaluation, it's really nice to be able to take a photograph that shows the actual height of the crawl space when you're there. That just helps provide some more documentation. Again, tells the story for us so that we can compare that photo to what's on site, to what's in the plans, and say, yes, absolutely, you made that change and that makes sense. It's totally justified. Exposed floors. I know a lot of people don't really understand why we're taking this photo because it doesn't show a lot of the characteristics of what's actually in that exposed floor, but it is a required photo and it means that it's required for every exposed floor. So especially if they're differing types, if we have one that's exposed to the exterior and then we have one that's exposed to the garage, those each need a photo and need to be submitted. Attics, we'll talk about in a little bit more detail, but in general, any attic that's accessible, we're looking for a wide angle shot that shows the construction of the attic. So we're looking to see kind of what the trusses are, what their spacing is, what the type of insulation is that's in there. And then we're also looking for that depth of the insulation shot. And we're trying to, a reminder that we're trying to take that shot at kind of the average depth of the insulation. If you've got an attic that's had a lot of wind washing in it and it's all over the place, take it at an average point. So that's for accessible attics. For cathedral and flat attics where you don't have an attic access hatch, what we're looking for is essentially the presence of them and where they start and stop. So we want to see the slope of the pitch and we want to see where it intersects with walls. And that will give us the best understanding of how that attic was actually constructed and what the presence of it was within the home. So really important to take that photo as well. When it comes to mechanical systems, I would say take photos of every mechanical system. So often we'll have really good photos of the primary heat source, but we'll have completely missed any of the supplemental heating. Really important. We need to take documentation of all of them. You can go ahead, Emma. Perfect. Okay. Heat pumps, air conditioners, any or outdoor condensing coil unit. Enercan has become a lot stricter in what they want from this photo. And so the photo in the middle there used to be an acceptable photo to document that there was a heat pump in place. Now they actually want to show that the install has been completed. So we want to see the line set running from the heat pump into the home. We want to see the electrical connections. We really need to document that this is not just essentially going to get picked up and moved somewhere else. So really important that we get that shot, just to kind of change the way it looks now. And the angle you take it at, essentially. And then obviously any of the model numbers, we're taking shots of those. I personally like to take the actual label from my condenser unit as opposed to the EnerGuide label. I just find that it usually has a little bit more information on it, makes it a little bit easier sometimes to find it in the databases than the EnerGuide one can. So that's just a personal preference, but either one works well. Okay. And then we didn't actually, I don't know about you, Emma, but I didn't have any files that had solar panels in them in this audit. But just a reminder, we're supposed to take those panels in their surrounding environment in a way that we can, if we can, identify how many panels are on each elevation and take photos of each one.
If you're not able to get a clear shot from the ground of the number of solar panels, I would follow up with the builder to get some kind of verification of the number of panels, whether it's a product order or an early design. I've even had really good luck, the builder providing photos that were taken by the solar installers when they were up on the roof, because I'm not going up on the roof. And again, like, that's not really your photo that you've taken, but I would include it as supplemental verification as the number of panels installed.
Yeah, absolutely. Great point. Some solar providers will actually have on their electrical panel a little plan of how many panels are associated to each section, and that can also help with supplemental information. So yeah, look for that as well. But all of those options would be completely acceptable from my end if I was getting an audit like that. Atypical energy loads. I'm going to let Emma talk about that one in a little bit. Half-story knee walls, gable end walls. Those are really important. They tell a story as well. Taking photos that show where things start and stop and what their shapes were and their presence is really, really important. Very often, I find bonus rooms, the shape and the volume of that space is not cohesive to what I actually see when I'm on site. So if I've had a really fun shape when I get to site that's completely different or even moderately different from what was shown on the plans, taking that photo and then adjusting my measurements to reflect what's actually on site kind of justifies why there's been a change there that's been made. So again, really important to take photos that kind of tell the whole story and show where things start and stop. And then finally, blower door equipment. This is another one that NRCan has gotten more particular on in the last round. So essentially, they want to see the entirety of the unit, your blower door fan, your manometer, everything is set up, installed, and operating, and you're at your minus 50 pressure on your manometer. So they want to see you right as you're taking your first reading, essentially, and they want to see everything in its surrounding place. So that can be really tricky. They do specify a wide angle photo that I have tried as hard as I can. I can't quite get there yet, but I have had some really good luck with the 0.5 zoom and a portrait photo as opposed to the wide angle. At least I'm getting everything in there. But the photos on the left and the right, those used to be acceptable. They no longer are. We really need to see that manometer in place as well, and we need to see all the tubes set up and everything that would show that you have the capacity to run that test properly. Okay, I think
Yeah. Thanks,
that's the
Tessa.
end. Yeah.
So, because photos are such a big part of it, I'm going to run through just some common issues that we see. For elevations, I see a lot of complicated homes that require typically more than 4 or 6 photos, right? It's not really one photo per side of the house anymore. It's multiple because we have juts and jogs, we have covered decks, we have a lot of things in the way that impede our ability to show. We have window wells that impede our ability to show all of the wall, all the way from grade up to top of roof line. So, this photo on the left here, might look like a good photo, but actually it's not. I'm not seeing any of the window wells on this side. This window well, I mean, I can see that there's a window here, but how deep does this window well go? There's a sunken patio here with a door I can't see, can barely see this. And even up here, like you're only really showing me, I don't know, 2/3 of the house elevations and windows and doors from this photo. So what I do is when I'm walking around and I'm taking all my photos, I pay attention to those things. I walk up to each window well and I take a close up so that I can see, is this a 2 foot window or is this a 4 foot window? I mean, yes, it's a little bit obscured, but at least I can see that it goes down further. Any sunken areas, I'm taking clear photos. And another thing that's a little bit of a pet peeve of mine is people will take photos with the door wide open. If the door is wide open, I cannot see presence or not of glazing in that door. For something like this on the top floor, that there's no good angle to get a photo showing the door and the 2 windows, take that from the inside, right? Note that, take it from the inside. Now I can see this is a full light door, not a half light or something like that. So just be mindful when you're walking around the house and also don't skip skylights. This actually was a pretty good angle. I could see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 skylights. But again, I think there actually were skylights on the front of the house. There was no way to get a photo of that from the exterior. My personal preference and recommendation is take photos from the inside so you can generally see, I don't know exactly, it's, maybe roughly a 2 by 4 foot. And, I think in this house, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, I think there was like 7 or 8. So from the interior, I would preferably like to see photos of all 8 skylights. Another typical one is your garage wall is part of your elevation. right? Sometimes I'll see, the front of house photo, the garage door might be up, but I'm only maybe again seeing half of the garage wall or a portion of the garage wall, or you can't see the mechanical room door or the entry door. So, taking clear photos showing the extent. If this was also here, this side of the wall, if this was also part of your exterior elevation, I would take a second photo showing that. Say if there was a mechanical room door over here, I want to see a photo of that. This door is a little bit ajar, but I would say it's closed enough that I can see that there's no glazing in those doors. Do garage doors typically have glazing? No, but again, I want to be able to see that solid opaque door. Um, this is an exposed floor. This is again, the ceiling of your garage is also an exposed floor. We need a photo of each exposed floor. So this also becomes a photo. Wide angle photos of basements or, multiple types of basements are also commonly missed. So, if you have maybe a crawl space attached to a finished basement, I want photos of both. I want photos showing the crawl space walls. This one had EPS. When I go and I look in the Hot 2000 file, I would expect to see, ICF as the interior finish material, not with gypsum, not with studs, not with bad insulation. The photo should match what's in the file. This photo here, I wouldn't even say is super sufficient because you can't really see the headers. Take a second up close photo. This is from a different one, but take another photo showing how the headers are insulated, especially if they're exposed. If there is also a finished basement portion of the home, or if the entire home is a complete finished basement, you still need wide angle photos showing this. And for me, I mean, I know I clearly can't see pony walls or headers, but as QAS, I would accept this as verification wide angle photos of basement, header, and pony walls. Even though I can't see it, this is how, it was on site when I was there. So those wide angle photos of basements are very important because this one photo is actually checking off 3 items in my QAS checklist. Oh, truss attics. So I know that this new construction is not fun, and there's been a lot of pushback of, in new construction, why do we need to do this? It seems like an existing home procedure. I sympathize. I feel the same way, but Enercan has come down super hard on the attic wide angle photos and the depth of the insulation. So, I mean, the documentation says like you must take it unless it's inaccessible. And an inaccessible attic basically means that if it's like an exterior entrance on the second floor of a house, that's inaccessible. Having the builder say you can't open it or it's painted shut or I didn't bring a ladder or my ladder wasn't tall enough doesn't qualify as an inaccessible attic. And if you don't go into the attic, the house is not eligible to receive an EnerGuide rating. That's how strict they are on this item. And I don't believe it's going to be changing anytime soon. So you have to follow the Appendix B photo requirements. Or if there's, some justification or reason why you can't access it, a copy of the building official's inspection report specifying the type and level of insulation could be accepted if there was a reason why it was truly inaccessible that day for you. So I would always recommend just taking the photos. Basically taking a photo showing the attic hatch is not enough. This is not, good justification of why it's inaccessible. If you were trying to take a photo to prove that like it was inaccessible for a certain reason, like I don't know, maybe there was like a washing machine directly underneath the attic and you like truly couldn't really get in, that could be a justification of like, look at how tight this area is, and I can't put a ladder on top of a washing machine or something like that to prove, the reason why you called it inaccessible and why you had to proceed with this second option here. So again, take the photos, maybe add a note in your data collection form, why it was considered inaccessible. Also just taking good photos, right? Like taking the photo of like the depth of the I don't know, attic well or the sides of the attic hatch. This is not considered an acceptable photo, or a photo where, you know, maybe you can't clearly read it, that would not be considered an acceptable photo. So what we're looking for is A, in addition to this, a wide angle photo, but B, the attic depth measurement. I mean, it needs to be super clear. All right, we're not looking at 20 inches here, we're looking at 19 inches, which I believe was, I don't know, maybe closer to R60 or something like that. But, you know, this is a good example of the depth measurement, whereas these ones would not be allowed. Other missing mandatory photos, sometimes missing model numbers of mechanical equipment. So these IBC boilers, which are made locally, they no longer have the labels on the side anymore. It's like part of this digital screen that you need to click through. Sometimes I see photos submitted like this, like, hey, I found the installation manual or operating manual, but this truly isn't enough information because there's three different models here. Like there's no proof to me which specific model number this was. You've, you know, shown me that there's three different model numbers. What you would need to do is on the IBC boiler, you know, take a look. Maybe you have to click through a couple settings, but there is a way to pull that model number off of that IBC boiler. So please be aware of that. Other situations that sometimes come up is, you know, maybe you have a furnace where it's like the model number is on the side here and you can't actually pull the model number because it's so close to the wall. At least take the photo telling the story, showing that like, hey, like there's the label, like I can't see it. In that situation, I would follow up with supplemental documentation and verification from the builder. Again, tell the story why you couldn't get that model number. This one in particular was actually a little bit different than that. The refrigerant line was right in front of the model number that we were trying to pull. The photo taken from below, this first photo, this wasn't actually the model number. Maybe, I don't know, maybe it was a serial number, not a model number. But if this alone was pulled, this wouldn't be correct. I think in our case, we were able to take a photo from the other side of the refrigerant line. A second photo was taken that did have the correct model number, but again, it was a little bit of like, you know, fussing around in order to get the correct model number. And this one, this was a site I was at. It was an HRV. I looked on the bottom, I looked on the sides, I opened up the actual front of the HRV. It's like the only HRV I've actually not been able to pull a model number off of. I don't know why. I don't know if it was on the back side that was tight against the wall or the label was missing, but everything that I did, I could, and it was even difficult to open this up, but I did. I opened it up. I could not find it. I had to get the model number from the builder. There's just no way that I was able to pull it from site. So when you are missing the model numbers and you want to use a user specified, you don't want to use the default. My personal opinion as QAS, if your builder is able to attest to a specific model number that was purchased and installed, and even better, if they're able to provide the documentation, that would be the best practice in this situation. Again, I do sometimes see blurry photos. So this would not meet the clarity requirements. This specific train I am familiar with. I don't know why, but the model number is on the inside of the compartment. So in order to get the model number off of this, you would actually need to take off the front cover or ask the builder to take off the front cover and pull the model number. It's like the labels on the inside of the compartment. Obviously, you wouldn't want to do that when it was on or firing, but you would need to make sure the equipment is turned off and open up that front cover to get that. Or if you were not comfortable doing that, getting the documentation. In this case, you know, pulling the evaporator coil only would not suffice as verification for the furnace, which is separate.
I'm just
As Tessa
gonna
mentioned, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, just real quick. I'm just going to jump in and just do a little 5-minute warning. I do want to make sure that we
Oh,
get through the slides that we have here and have some time for discussion. So for those of you that are on the call, if you have a hard stop at 11:30, we completely understand you will have access to this recording. But if you can stay with us for probably about 10 extra minutes, we should be able to cover everything. and have time for some additional questions as well.
Thanks, Vanessa.
Yeah.
So Tessa mentioned this already, but taking photos of supplemental systems is very important. Um, and correctly identifying if it's meant to be modeled as always. So suites that are only heated with electric baseboard would be modeled as always with the certain floor area of that suite. Um, we don't want to miss that. Sometimes I see issues between mini splits modeled as whole home cooling when maybe they were only present in one room or one story. In order to model a mini split system as whole home cooling, there needs to be at least one mini split head per above grade story. Taking the photo of this is not enough. You would also need to take a photo of the model number. And I would strongly recommend if you have 3 mini splits, take the model number of each one. Don't just take one model number of one mini split head. Take all the photos, tell the full story. Sometimes I see townhomes that might have maybe a heat pump system, forced air for like the second and third stories, but the first story, in the mechanical room below the stairs and also at the front entry, they have electric baseboard. I would model that first story as supplemental heating electric baseboard always. I wouldn't model the whole thing as heat pump. And also sometimes just double checking if the crawl space or basement has a different form of heating. So, maybe you have a forced air furnace with heat pump for the rest of the house, but the crawl space or basement is, different. It's electric baseboard, or maybe it's even radiant and floor with a boiler. I've seen that before as well. And also these wall heaters, if they are truly supplemental, there is no requirement to take the photo, but there are certain situations where if this is the only heating source for, say, a bedroom, or sometimes I see like a rooftop stairwell going up to a roof deck at that landing, that's their heating source for that stairwell and that top of landing. So again, identifying this correctly as a supplemental heating system for that portion of the home. And also, in new construction, when you do have, say, like a natural gas fireplace, even if it is supplemental, but you're modeling it as like never used, you still have to take a photo of the installed fireplace. So you have some really good indications, like on the drawings, that there's going to be a gas fireplace. On site, you can see from the photo from the exterior elevation that there was clearly an installed fireplace, but I need the photo of the inside fireplace as well. Even if it's set to usage as never, you have to take the photo and include it in the energy model. And then I've already talked about this, but if you do verify that, there's a fireplace, whether it's electric or gas, that is used as the primary heating source for that room, meaning it's the only dedicated heating source for that room, there's no other heating source for that room, then you would model it as always, and you would have to verify the make, model, floor area, and if it was gas, the flue diameter, and if the damper was open or closed during the blower door test. So, quite often I do see that miss sometimes if you have like a wood burning fireplace that was set to always. Rare, but could come up. And then for atypical energy loads, other than the mini splits, there is no requirement to take photos of these things. But sometimes when I'm doing my QS audits, someone's taking an elevation shot of the home and I can see, oh, there was a hot tub, but they didn't model it as an atypical energy load or identify it. Or sometimes you'll see, again, in your elevation shot, you'll see that, oh, there's, a gas fireplace that is clearly a plumbed gas fireplace, or an EV charger, or a gas barbecue that looks like it's plumbed. So again, you don't actually have to take photos of hot tubs and pools and EV chargers. I personally do it to remind myself, like, hey, I see an atypical energy load. I'm going to take the photo so I remember to input it into my data collection form and into my file. But again, just because we're not modeling the energy use of these items, if they're present, we still have to identify them and include them. We only have a few more slides here. Tessa, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, sure. So just a kind of reminder, kind of building off what Emma was just talking about with atypical energy loads and updating your Hot 2000 file once you get back to the office. It is common for us to see, especially in grade calculations, I would say, um, that the plans differ from the site conditions. So we'll see, say, the left elevation was shown to be half below grade, and the photos show that they put a retaining wall in and there's just a set of stairs and it's fully above grade on that side. If that's not updated in the model, we're going to catch it. We're going to notice right away and we're going to comment on it. So it's really important that when you get back to the office, before you submit this file, before you run all your final calculations, you are updating that Hot 2000 file to what you actually observed on site. So things to check: window and door sizes, the presence of glazing indoors, areas where there were vaults, making sure that they were actually the size and pitch that was put on the plans. Wall heights were the same. I just recently had one that was supposed to be 9 foot ceiling duplex. I got there and it was two 8 foot ceilings. That makes a massive difference on your wall assemblies, on your volume. All the windows got smaller because now their header heights are different. So it's all information that needs to be adjusted in your Hot 2000 file when you get back to the office
Oops.
at a bare minimum before it gets submitted to Enercan. You can go ahead, Emma.
So the practice that I do is I always take my exterior photos first, and then when I'm inside the house, maybe right before, right after my blower door test, I have my computer out anyways because I'm taking the data. I'll pull up my marked up drawings and I do a quick review of the photos that I've taken compared to my elevations. And so on a house like this, I can say, okay, yeah, all the windows look good, but clearly they added this door light here to the front door. While I'm on site, I'm going to go and take that site measurement so I have the information. And kind of same to what Tessa was saying, you can look at the grade. Do the grade from the photos match what's on the drawings? If not, do you need to go do some supplemental verification while you're on site? Crawl space heights, frost wall heights, if that's visible in the basement, you can check. Um, Presence of exposed floors. You can also verify your, pull up your elevations. Say if there was like had been a gable here, you can look at the shape in your drawings. Does it look like my photo? Like do a little bit of a check while you're on site because you'll thank yourself later because it's easier to pull the information while you're on site than try to get it from the builder later. You can even, if you want, take photos. I wouldn't say this is like a required photo, but it's helpful for yourself. Basically, what I do, I don't typically take photos of the glazing. Like if it's a full door light, that would be kind of a hard photo to take vertically. I just take my measurements and I put it directly into my data collection form. That's how I manage door lights, which honestly, I would say like 80% of my projects have different size door lights, and that comes up super common in audits. So just quickly to wrap up everything that we've talked about today and the best practices, have a complete data collection form. Ideally, pull all the information into one location, one data collection form that's being submitted as opposed to multiple locations. Make sure you're verifying your as-built assemblies and that as-built assemblies is clear in your data collection form. That's the correct location. Making sure if you're doing custom codes for glazing, you're verifying the USI and solar heat gain coefficient of each type of window and each operation type, and you're providing supporting documentation as proof. Appendix B, know it inside and out. Take your time when taking your photos on site, and if you have to take lots of exterior photos, take lots of exterior photos. And finally, don't forget to update based on site conditions, which is what the end of the presentation was on. We want to have modeled correct glazing areas, correct mechanical systems, correct geometry, and then, inputting the proper blower door test results. So that brings us pretty much 5 minutes over time. Sorry about that, but if you have any burning questions, we would love to answer them for you today.
Yes, absolutely. Please feel free to put them in the chat, or if you want to unmute yourself and ask your question, feel free to. There were some questions that were coming up throughout the presentation that Mark was working on in the background and answering them. live
Thank you,
there.
Mark.
Thank you, Mark.
So that was done. While you're thinking of any questions, or while perhaps you're taking some time to put them in the chat, I do want to give a little bit of a plug to the next Friday Fix. So April session, it's the last Friday in April, and that one is actually it's called Protecting Your Practice, and it's going to focus on insurance essentials for energy advisors in BC. We're going to keep it very high level. It's not going to be energy, or I'm sorry, it's not going to be insurance provider specific, but it's going to go into the details of what to make sure that you have in place to be protected on site. Liability insurance, general omissions, errors insurance. We want to make sure that you have everything that is needed. And I'm going to put a little link in our chat here. That's the registration page. So if that is of interest to you, please click that link and you can register and join us in April. Again, if you register but can't join for the full amount, we totally understand and we'll send you a video recording of that as well. If you have any other questions or suggestions for Friday Fix, please send me an email anytime. The next one is likely going to be when to use a heat pump calculator. So that will be something we'll do before the end of the year. We'll take a break over summertime, give you guys your July and August, but I am looking for content for May and June. So one of those will definitely be the heat pump calculator and some other goodies. Um, I don't see any questions coming through, but I hope you did find this helpful. Some tips and tricks and best practices. And trust me when I say we've learned through this process as well. To be a quality assurance specialist, typically you have to go through a few audits where you learn a lot from Enercan. So that is definitely something that our working group has all gone through. And these are all tips that they're providing to you because they've learned either the hard way or they've changed their process to make sure that they're reaching all the targets that they need to. Oh, and okay, so I see a question in here. There was a question about crawl space and basement walls being different assemblies. Let me find that. That was originally from Josh, I believe.
If you had a crawl space attached to a finished basement where the below grade wall between the two had a different assembly type, because we leave it out of H2K, we can't adjust. Sorry, I'm trying to understand. The two had a different walls, and because we leave it out for H2K to figure, we can't adjust. So I guess what Josh is
Yeah,
saying that, go
sorry, can
ahead.
you hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, Josh,
Yeah,
go ahead.
so like we talked about before about where a hot 2000 we leave that center portion out, right? But what if it like I'm thinking back, this project was, I don't know, it was years ago now, but I do recall that there was the section of between the two where it was, a high crawl space and a full basement, and that below grade wall, it was a different insulation type than what was in the rest of the frost walls. And so if we're leaving that out of Hot 2000, there's no way for us to make that differentiation.
I think I know exactly what you're saying. I saw this actually recently on one of my projects. I was there at mid-construction and there was like literally no insulation. And I was like,
Yeah,
how are you planning to insulate this wall, please? And I think they had even done their 2x4s on flat, so there wasn't even very much room.
yeah,
So in the end, like they did maximize the space available with insulation, but like it's almost like a loophole. It's like this is a very low insulated wall that I'm not accounting for in my Hot 2000 file. Like, is this right? Is this fair? We're doing energy modeling for code compliance. So I totally see your point, Josh, that this is not really a best practice and we probably should be more concerned about this wall. So honestly, I would say like as a consultant, recommend that they do put as much insulation in that area as they can. But unfortunately, following the interguide procedures as it's written, like they're kind of getting a freebie for that wall because we're not modeling it and we're not accounting for that assembly technically. But that doesn't mean that like with our consultant hats on, that we should just be saying, yeah, you don't even need to put insulation there, right? There's durability and condensation concerns with that. So we should for sure be flagging that as an issue to our builders, even if it's not, perfectly accurately represented in the H2K file.
totally. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's exactly the situation. So, and then the only other question I had was about fireplaces. I know, like we've I had some issues sometimes, like electric fireplaces, they often don't have like a removable cover, and often no visible model numbers. Do you guys have issues with that?
If it's supplemental, we don't need the make and model. If it is something that's used for always, I would take a photo of the fireplace and then I would get the model number on a document from the builder and submit that as supplemental.
Does that go the same?
Yeah.
Because we've been called out before about not providing pictures of the tag from a gas fireplace, and arguably that's the same supplemental situation. So, honestly, like sometimes we come across, $10,000, $15,000 fireplaces that I don't really want to take the cover off of because the
Mm.
black scratch is so easy.
Hmm.
So if I can just take a picture of that and we don't need to take a picture of the tag that's buried underneath the fireplace, that would be awesome.
I mean, Tessa, like for
I
supplemental, we don't have to take the make and model, right?
We've been
I
called out on it
believe
before
with
though.
fireplaces, with gas fireplaces, I believe you are still supposed to. I can pull that up. Um, Again, that's one of those things where, yeah, if you're worried about damaging the equipment and you can get the model number and make an invoice something from the builder, provide that as supplemental information. From an electric fireplace standpoint, I would not ding you on that at all. I wouldn't expect there to be a model number. Mostly the model number is there for me to look up the efficiency, and the electric fireplace is going
True.
to have an automatic efficiency. What I would want to see is in the description box in the supplemental field, just tell me what it is that you've put in there because sometimes, especially with electrical equipment, it you have to kind of put in like a fan heater instead of a fireplace. And so I'm looking around to see what that electrical equipment actually was. So if in the description you just put electric fireplace, then I'm going to be able to assign that directly to the photo that's attached to it. Super helpful.
Brianna's added a
Mm,
screenshot of the photo requirements in the chat here for mechanical systems heating.
yeah, yeah.
Awesome. Okay, great. Well, I think we can leave it at that. Enjoy your Friday, everyone. Have a wonderful
Yeah.
weekend. Thank you for joining us today. Special thank you, Emma and Tessa. Thank you so much for all the work that you put into preparing this. And of course, all the work that you were doing with coaching and all that kind of stuff. We'll have maybe a week or two off and then it starts all over again. So I'll be in touch about that. As always, anybody on this call, if you have any questions, please reach out to us. Send me an email, send me a note, and I'm happy to get back to you as soon as I can. But yeah, happy Friday, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks,
All
everyone.
right. See you, everyone.